Hundreds of trust investors gathered together to defend their rights. Many are wondering what happens if trust is no longer trustworthy. Residents in China's largest city facing fast-flowing floods and mudslides. This as officials label the floods the lowest emergency level, warning it's just the beginning of flood season. One of China's most important agricultural regions under attack by locusts, the insects decimating crops crucial to the region's survival. A Beijing mall shut down after a confirmed virus case was found. Now residents are wondering about the efficacy of the health tracing QR codes. And a bipartisan bill sanctioning China now heading to the president's desk. This in response to the national security law on Hong Kong. See why analysts say it could strike a major blow to Beijing. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Now to China's floods. In Chongqing City, upstream of the famous Three Gorges Dam on the Yangtze River, mudslides hit part of the city. Since the beginning of June, floods have been battering southern and central China. 70% of China's provinces have suffered due to heavy rain, floodwaters, or mudslides. Chinese authorities announced on Thursday that the country has entered flood season. The same day, the inflow of the Three Gorges Reservoir into the Yangtze River reached over 1.7 million cubic feet per second. Chinese authorities called it the first of many big flood waves this year. An emergency level 4 alert was activated the same day. China's emergency response meter is divided into 4 levels according to the severity of the disaster. Level 4 is the lowest, least dangerous warning. Level 1 is the highest and indicates extraordinary danger. That means right now, Chinese authorities say the country's flood situation is classed as the lowest level of emergency. Forecasters are warning that from July 4th to the 6th, rainfall will increase in China's southwest region to the mid and downstream sections of the Yangtze River. The area includes Wuhan and Shanghai. The increased rainfall will pose a high risk of flooding both in the mountains and in the urban areas. Now we turn to Beijing. Inside a shopping mall, a customer was seen screaming and crying on Thursday after she received a phone call from a hospital informing her that she tested positive for the CCP virus. She was sent to the hospital for treatment. A restaurant owner there told us the whole shopping mall has been closed, including her restaurant. Even takeout and delivery are suspended. She said she didn't know if they'd be allowed to reopen the next day. One netizen said since the woman's positive test results sent her into such extreme panic, it shows the epidemic has put the whole society under overwhelming pressure. The shopping mall is located 10 miles from Tiananmen Square in the center of Beijing. Now to the locusts. Recently, we reported about locusts emerging in northern China and one province in central China. Now, locusts emerge in the southern Chinese province of Guangxi, one of the most important agricultural provinces in China. They are eating crops. Chinese state-run media said 16 acres of farmland there has been hit by locusts. But people from that area said the affected area is far more than 16 acres. Maintaining investment and finance stability has become China's keynote. Hundreds of Chinese trust investment victims are oppressed by authorities when trying to defend their rights. Hundreds of investors gathered in front of the headquarters of Sichuan Trust Company, or STC, demanding that the company return their money. The police later dispersed the crowd, detaining some. Sichuan Trust Company broke its promise. Its $3.6 billion project failed to pay its investors because of poor quality underlying assets. For several years, the company generated returns for early investors by bringing in new investors, like a Ponzi scheme. But China's dire economic situation means this system is hard to keep up. Voice of America reported that a Sichuan trust investor claimed the company's TOT project is engaged in illegal operations, like cooking the books, misusing funds, and investment fraud. China Banking and Insurance Regulatory Commission announced Beijing had issued an order suspending the TOT project. In the middle of June, hundreds of investors protested outside as officials, investor representatives, and the company staff held negotiations. The protesters were finally dispersed by police. There were more police and protesters at the scene. The police blocked the view of passers-by with police vehicles and buses. Mr. Liu, a TOT investor from Beijing, told us some people were detained, among whom were two elderly people.
The police seized two seniors in their 60s or 70s and hurt the lady's hand.
A TOT investor, Mr. Wu, says he and another dozen investors simply had a meeting with company management. They did not protest or do anything else, but the police still warned them in phone calls and visits. After the negotiation, Sichuan Trust finally agreed they will sell their building and license to compensate the investors. However, the move is not highly practical. One of the assets is currently frozen and the other is mortgaged. Mr. Liu told us the starting point for trust investment is nearly $150,000. That's a lifetime of savings for many.
If I don't defend my rights, my hard-working years in previous decades will be in vain.
Mr. Liu is unhappy Beijing authorities are simply suspending the project. He says the authorities only want to eliminate the financial system's poor quality underlying assets, but don't care about the billions of dollars investors are losing. Reporting by Xu Wenhui, NTD News. Thousands of Hong Kongers have taken to the streets to protest Beijing's national security law. But it's not a sentiment held by everyone. Behind closed doors, some investors are welcoming the inclusion by the mainland. Analysts and traders say markets in Hong Kong will benefit from more Chinese company listings and more links to the world's second largest economy. Chief Executive at investment firm Geosecurities, Francis Lun, says there's a disconnect between the financial sector and the city's pro-democracy fighters. He added Hong Kong's financial market will survive as long as Chinese companies come and list in Hong Kong. Chinese companies already make up over 70% of Hong Kong's stock market. Analysts say the city will financially benefit from closer ties to the mainland, which could soften the economic blow from Washington stripping Hong Kong of its special status. But investors' view of the law could change if questions over Hong Kong's legal and political independence cause businesses to leave. The city's economy would take a big hit in that case. While the new law brings Hong Kong closer to the mainland, including bringing in Chinese money, it puts the city's international business relations in jeopardy. Many Western countries are wary of doing business directly with China, preferring Hong Kong instead. Hong Kong passed from British rule back to Chinese rule in 1997. Under the One Country, Two Systems framework, Hong Kongers were granted more freedom than people in mainland China. The city also has separate legal and economic systems. That policy was supposed to stay in place until at least 2047. Critics have raised concern that the new law eradicates those differences, putting Hong Kong's place on the international stage at risk. Many investors are staying silent about their views on the law. Reuters said more than half a dozen people refuse to talk about any effects the law could have on their businesses. Some are already reviewing old posts on social media and deleting anything they think could be used against them. Some managers have even advised employees that topics including the new law are to be kept off messaging apps or internet cafes. And as Hong Kong comes under increased international scrutiny, China is increasing its scrutiny of foreign press inside the country. Beijing has asked 4 U.S. media outlets to disclose details of their staff and financial operations in China, as freedom of the press in the country appears to shrink even further. That seems especially so for foreign media. More than a dozen journalists have been expelled from the country in the past year. Many of them are from the U.S. China has said the expulsions are in response to moves by the U.S. But critics say the Communist Party has used Washington's moves as a way to get rid of reporters who are covering sensitive topics, like the internment camps in Xinjiang or the CCP virus outbreak in Wuhan. The bipartisan bill sanctioning China has now been passed by both the House and Senate. Analysts say by targeting the finance sector, the bill could strike a major blow to Beijing for its threats to Hong Kong's freedom.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
A bipartisan bill sanctioning China is now heading to the president's desk. It aims to punish Beijing's crackdown on Hong Kong. The bill will impose sanctions on Chinese officials who are involved in implementing the new national security law, as well as banks that do business with such officials.
Critically, our legislation also takes another step. It penalizes banks that choose to finance the erosion of Hong Kong's autonomy, banks that would put marginal profits ahead of basic human rights of the people of Hong Kong.
Beijing's new law in Hong Kong carries penalties of up to life imprisonment to target those accused of subversion and separatism. Such charges are often used by Beijing to suppress dissidents and human rights activists in mainland China.
The bill is a larger signal to China. It's a message that the United States and the free world are no longer willing to look past some of the worst behavior that's been occurring. It's a message that our patience has run out.
According to the bill, named Hong Kong Autonomy Act, President Trump will have the final say on specific forms of the sanctions. In theory, he could cut off the sanctioned banks' access to the international dollar transaction system controlled by the U.S. Experts have argued that the finance sector is the U.S. trump card in terms of sanctioning China. Bloomberg reports that China's largest banks have over $1 trillion in dollar funding at stake and face potentially steep fines according to the new bill. And the sanctions target not only Chinese or Hong Kong banks, but any global banks whose customers include Chinese officials and their relatives. U.S. economist Peter Morici wrote that by sanctioning all foreign banks, the U.S. would force some of the largest banks in Germany and France to make a choice: do business in New York or Shanghai. Meanwhile, Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross told Fox Business that all companies who have Hong Kong as their headquarters for Asia are likely to begin to rethink whether that's still a good idea. In an earlier interview with NTD, Senior Vice President at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce said that their members are worried about the development.
Changing Hong Kong's status and mucking around with Hong Kong's rule of law and transparency and sense of independence, as it were, as in a word, from much of what happens on the mainland is probably not a great idea as far as our membership is concerned.
The new Beijing law targets not just Hong Kong citizens, but also foreigners. The governments of Canada, Australia, and Taiwan have issued warnings to its citizens about traveling to Hong Kong. Canada said they may be at an increased risk of arbitrary detention, leading to extradition to mainland China.
And we've seen some of the warnings come out from places like Canada about the potential challenge for foreign citizens operating in Hong Kong, and that's worrisome, to be candid. But I think a lot of our members have strong ties to Hong Kong, have deep roots in Hong Kong, and frankly, many of our members are active in China proper. So if Hong Kong just becomes another Chinese city, I think many of our members will roll with it. But that I think would be very unfortunate for Hong Kong's special role.
Reporting by Penny Zhou and Paul Greeny, NTD News.
Australia is joining the UK and considering safe haven proposals for Hong Kong residents after China imposed a new national security law on the financial hub.
As the world watched new protests erupt in Hong Kong against a national security law introduced by Beijing, the UK and Taiwan have both offered assistance to Hong Kongers that wish to leave. The new law punishes crimes of secession, subversion, terrorism and collusion with foreign forces with up to life in prison. On Thursday, Prime Minister Scott Morrison said Australia will also offer support.
We do find these events very concerning, and we've been very clear about our statements that in concert with many other nations, this is not a position Australia has commented on in isolation. We've done so with many other like-minded countries about these events.
Morrison says they will offer safe haven visas to those who want to exit the former British colony, and said they were putting the final touches on the proposal. Authorities in Beijing and Hong Kong have repeatedly said the legislation is aimed at a few troublemakers and will not affect rights and freedoms. But critics fear it will crush freedoms and the city's independent legal system. The law has also drawn international outcry from the United States and the European Union, who have warned of serious consequences over the law. Britain said it would stand by its word and offer all those in Hong Kong with British national overseas status a special immigration route, where they can stay for 5 years to live and work in Britain. Britain and Canada also updated their travel advisories for Hong Kong yesterday, saying there was an increased risk of detention. Hong Kong police arrested more than 300 people on Wednesday, the first day the law was in effect, as protesters turned out in the thousands calling for freedom. Police say 9 of the arrests were for violations of the new law.
On the same day, China urged Australia to, quote, stop using Hong Kong to interfere in China's internal affairs, and warned Australia not to go further down this wrong path. The UK government is opening the door to millions of people from Hong Kong and will offer them a direct and simple path to citizenship.
About 350,000 British national overseas passport holders and their dependents will be given the right to come to the UK for 5 years. This includes the right to work and study. A year later, they can seek citizenship. A total of up to 3 million people are eligible.
But we will not look the other way when it comes to Hong Kong, and we will not duck our historic responsibilities to its people.
Secretary Raab listed the many ways Beijing's new security law in Hong Kong violates the Sino-British Joint Declaration and Beijing's own laws.
It is a sad day for the people of Hong Kong, and one which can only undermine international trust in the Chinese government's willingness to keep its word and live up to its promises.
Earlier, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson also condemned China over the new security law.
The enactment and imposition of this national security law constitutes a clear and serious breach of the Sino-British Joint Declaration.
China's foreign ministry threatened Britain that they would have to bear the consequences if they proceeded to offer citizenship to people from Hong Kong. The CCP claims that Hong Kong's matters are China's internal affairs. The UK has granted asylum to Simon Chen, a former employee at Britain's consulate in Hong Kong.
Chen, a Hong Kong citizen, was abducted while on a business trip in mainland China last August. He was held for 15 days and says he was tortured. Beijing accused him of spying and inciting political unrest in Hong Kong. 6 months ago, he applied for UK asylum. Now he has his answer. Chung says he is very grateful and he will continue fighting against China's expanding totalitarianism. He hopes to return to Hong Kong in the future after democracy and freedom are established.
The Team China in Focus is taking a short break tomorrow and Saturday this week. We hope you also have a happy 4th of July. And we have some good news. You can also see us on TV starting next week. NTD America is launching on Verizon Fios TV and Frontier Fios TV in the US. And you can see China in Focus on there too. Thanks for watching.